our final witness is Ms. Rodas, who's recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Jayapal, and distinguished members of the committee. It is an honor to be here. I thank you for the invitation to share my testimony. My goal is to inspire action to safeguard the lives of migrant children, including the staggering 85,000 that are missing. Today, children will work overnight shifts at slaughterhouses, factories, restaurants to pay their debts to smugglers and traffickers. Today, children will be sold for sex. Today, children will call a hotline to report they are being abused, neglected, and trafficked, and we don't know if they're going to get the help they need. For nearly a decade, unaccompanied children have been suffering in the shadows, and I have to confess, I knew nothing about their suffering until 2021, when I volunteered to help the Biden administration with the crisis at the southern border. As part of Operation Artemis, I was deployed to the Pomona Fairplex Emergency Intake Site in California to help HHS, Office of Refugee Resettlement, reunite children with sponsors in the United States. I thought I was going to help place children in loving homes. Instead, I discovered that children are being trafficked through a sophisticated network that begins with recruiting in home country, smuggling to the US border, and ends when ORR delivers a child to a sponsor. Some sponsors are criminals and traffickers and members of transnational criminal organizations. Some sponsors view children as commodities and assets to be used for earning income. This is why we are witnessing an explosion of labor trafficking. Now, whether it's intentional or not, it could be argued that the United States government has become the middleman in a large-scale, multi-billion-dollar child trafficking operation that is run by bad actors seeking to profit off of the lives of children. As for me, my interest is the safety of the children. I do not view this as a political issue. I view this as a humanitarian issue. I assure you, my motives are the highest and best. I want the children protected. So I want to tell you some of what I witnessed personally at the Pomona Fairplex. I saw vulnerable indigenous children from Guatemala who speak Mayan dialects and cannot speak Spanish. That means they cannot ask for help in English. They cannot ask for help in Spanish. They become captives of their sponsors. I have sat with case managers as they've cried to tell me the horror of what has happened to children as they make the journey to this country. I saw apartment buildings where 20, 30, and 40 unaccompanied minors have been released. I saw sponsors trying to simultaneously sponsor children from multiple ORR sites at one time. I saw sponsors using multiple addresses to obtain sponsorships of children. And I saw numerous cases of children in debt bondage, and the child knew they had to stay with the sponsor until the debt was paid. Realizing that we were not offering the children the American dream, but instead putting them in modern-day slavery with wicked overlords, was a terrible revelation. A terrible revelation. These children are a captive victim population with no access to law enforcement or knowledge of their rights. They are extorted, abused, neglected, and that is why I blew the whistle in 2021. I witnessed firsthand the horrors of child trafficking and exploitation. My life will never be the same after what I saw, but I have hope because I'm counting on you. It's my hope that you'll take action to end this crisis, to safeguard the lives of these vulnerable children. People have asked me, what can be done? What would you suggest? Well, first, I think HHS's #1 priority is oversight. They must commit to oversight, transparency, and accountability. If I could wave a magic wand, this, I believe, could be quickly solved by experts in the IG community. There is a Pandemic Analytics Center of Excellence, or the PACE, as we call it. I believe if data analysts at the PACE could look at the data, children could be rescued, criminals could be prosecuted. If the PACE had access to this data, it shows where the children are and who has them. I think also we need to change the culture of speed over safety. Speed is the wrong performance measure when dealing with children. We need to revamp the vetting process of sponsors and have case managers who have investigative backgrounds, data analytics backgrounds, some certified fraud examiners. And I think we need to reimagine a system where the sponsor is the accountable party. Sponsors should be required to report to ORR. And lastly, stop retaliating against whistleblowers. Stop retaliating against the people who are trying to tell the truth to save the children. As it is written, a wise man listens to advice, while a fool continues in his folly, and HHS needs to be wise to care for these children.
Thank you very much. Your time has expired.
When I get back into the Oval Office, we will totally obliterate the deep state. We will establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to declassify and publish all documents on deep state spying, censorship, and corruption. By the way, they spied on my campaign. They got caught. Can you imagine if let's take Barack Hussein Obama, let's say we spied on his campaign, you got caught. What do you think would happen? You think it would just be some stories in only a few newspapers, because most of them don't even want to write it. They would have brought back the electric chair. That's what they would have done. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace, unequal justice. And I will require every federal employee to pass a new civil service test. How about the president? Let's start with the president. Demonstrating an understanding of our Constitution. To stop the local Marxist prosecutors who release rapists and murderers while persecuting conservatives. On day one of my new administration, I will direct the DOJ to investigate every radical district attorney and attorney general in America for their illegal, racist, in reverse enforcement of the law. I will quickly restore the most secure border in U.S. history, just as we had 3 years ago. We had the strongest, most powerful, most secure border in the history of our country. 3 years ago, we had the most secure. We built hundreds of miles of wall. It worked, by the way. Then we were going to do 200 more miles of wall in certain areas where we could see it was a little weaker than we wanted it. We started that. Could have been finished in 3 weeks if he did it. We had the stuff ordered. He took it away and hid it so that Texas and Arizona couldn't use it. And that's what I said. I guess they really do want open borders, and they actually want open borders, and nobody understands why. Why do you want to have people from prisons? Why do they want that? Why do you want people from prisons and mental institutions and insane asylums? That's a step above. That's Silence of the Lamb type, okay? Why do we want these people in our country? Why are we allowing them? And you know, you have to see these other countries. They are, I mean, they've never had it so good. Their prisons are emptied out into the U.S. They have no more costs. They don't want to take care of these people for 70 years, which is what you could have. I mean, they have this MS-13. You saw what happened yesterday with this killer, this thug. He was an MS-13. The level of violence, they called it demonic. The level of violence is incredible. We have become a dumping ground for the entire world. The money they save, no prisons, no mental institutions. There was a story recently about a psychologist or psychiatrist, but a psychologist who worked in mental wards in South America. And he said, I worked a good man, he worked 24 hours a day taking care of very mentally ill people. And he was sitting there reading a newspaper, and they asked him, what's he doing? He said, I have no more work. The people have all been let go into the United States. Can you believe this is what we're doing? How stupid are we? This is what we're doing. And this you pay for. I mean, sure, we can get a lot of them out, but This is what we're paying for, and the crime, you have not seen anything. Wait till you see this. But he said they've let him go in the United States. But this is not true with the 3 or 4 countries that we think of, Honduras and Mexico, El Salvador. This isn't just that little area. This is all over the world they're letting them in, from all over the world. They're coming in, they're coming through the southern border, and we had it stopped up. One of the very first bills I signed will be for a massive increase in Border Patrol and colossal increase in the number of ICE deportation officers. We're going to follow the Eisenhower model. People don't realize it with Eisenhower. He was very tough on illegal immigration. A lot of people don't realize that. He was really tough on illegal immigration. We will use all necessary state, local, federal, and military resources to carry out the largest domestic deportation operation in American history. And they'll take them back, too. You know that story. They weren't taking them back, and I said, good, if they don't take it, they weren't taking them back for decades. And the generals came up there, sure, they won't take them back, sir. And I said, well, do we give them any money, like any kind of subsidies or anything? Yes, sir, I'd like to find out. So it comes back $750 million. $750. So I said, listen, the 3 countries. I said, no more money for them starting this afternoon at 5 o'clock. The next morning, I got 3 calls from 3 presidents of 3 countries. Nice people, they're smart. I don't hold it against them. They got away with it for years. They'd put airplanes on the runways when we're flying in with prisoners or MS-13 people that you don't want in this country, believe me. These are vicious, vicious, the most violent gang in the world, probably, almost definitely. And they'd put airplanes so you couldn't land the plane. So I said, how much? $750. I said, here's what we're doing. Immediately, you're going to stop payment of all money going to these countries. You're going to stop payment now. Next day, I get 3 calls. The presidents of those countries, separate calls, totally. Sir, I understand there's a misunderstanding. Yeah, we want your MS-13 killers that you sent over here. We want them back. And we want everybody to go back to your country. We want them. We're going to bring them back. Sir, we'd be honored to take MS-13 back. We think they're lovely people. What seems to be the problem? No, we would love to take them back. Immediately opened up. Nobody has seen that for 25 years. It took me 1 night. We would be honored. It would be a great honor to bring back MS-13 so they can kill our people instead of yours. No, it's terrible. The people that run our country are stupid people. I will ask every state and federal agency to identify every known or suspected gang member in America. And by the way, our police are incredible. Our firemen are incredible. Our police are incredible. And you know what? They know the bad ones. They're in the cities. These Democrat-run cities are going to hell. The whole world is watching. But these police are incredible. They know the bad ones, but they don't want to lose their pension. They don't want to lose their wife or their husband. They don't want to lose their home. So they're told to stand back, but they know every bad one. They know everything about it. But I'll ask every state and federal agency to identify every known or suspected gang member in America, and every one of them that is here illegally. The police know every one of them. And we'll pick them up and we'll send them back home where they came from. They'll be out of here. And I will restore my travel ban to keep radical Islamic terrorists out of our country. You saw what happened. 4 years. 4 years we went. 4 years. You saw that, right? We were very tough on that. We don't want our buildings blown up. We don't want to have problems. The Biden border crisis is also a drug and fentanyl crisis and a human trafficking crisis like never before, mostly with women, very sadly, mostly with women. And it's now the number is 12 times what it was 3 years ago, 12 times. We had it really down. We were so tough on that, what they do with women and to women. Under my administration, we reduced drug overdose deaths in New Hampshire by 18%. 18. We had it 15, then we had it 18. And our First Lady worked very hard on that, I will tell you. She worked very hard on that. And instead of being down under Biden, as you know, and your police and firemen do an incredible job, you have a real big drug problem in New Hampshire, incredible, almost worse than anybody, relatively speaking. That's what the governor should focus on, not running for president where he's at less than 1%. That's what he should focus on. But you have a real problem here, and I have to tell you, your police and your firemen, I spent time with them, and they took me around one day, and the job they do on saving people, a lot of the job they do is saving people that have overdosed. It's incredible. The drug cartels are waging war in America, and it's time that America is going to wage war. That's what we're going to do. We're going to wage war on the cartels. We're being invaded. Our country is being invaded and destroyed. I will knock out the cartels just as we destroyed and knocked out the ISIS caliphate. The ISIS caliphate is tougher. I was told you couldn't do it it would take 3 to 4 years to do it, and sir, I don't think we could do it at all. I did it in 3 weeks. I knocked them out in 3 weeks. We have great generals. I want not the guys on television that leave Afghanistan before they take out our equipment and our American citizens, where we lost 13 great people. And nobody ever says this, where many soldiers were just obliterated. Their arms, their legs, their face obliterated because of people that didn't know how to do their job. And why aren't these people fired? Why aren't they fired? And I will ask Congress to pass legislation ensuring that drug dealers, drug kingpins, and human traffickers receive the death penalty, because it's the only way you're going to stop it.
We have a situation with the Department of Justice. It had a very wonderful beginning in 1789 with the first Attorney General. And quite unfortunately, it has devolved into something not recognizable. You know, its job is to deal with crime and to protect rule of law. And on both fronts, it does not seem to be doing that right now. Most notably, we experienced the FBI knowing that claims of Russia collusion were false from the previous administration, but working with corrupt media figures to disseminate this false narrative that the president was a traitor who had colluded with Russia to steal the 2016 election. Not its appropriate role. We know that they got the laptop of the son of the current president in 2019. I don't know if a lot of people realize that. They got the laptop in 2019. They had 3 choices about what to do with that laptop. They could have investigated it and dealt with the corruption and other problems that were on that laptop. They declined to do that. They could have ignored it and just said, we're not going to even look into this. They didn't do that either. They ran an information op against the American people to claim that the laptop was Russian disinformation when they knew that not to be true. This is a major problem here, I think. And there are all sorts of other problems, which I would welcome you guys to talk about what you think are some of the other major problems. We would like to discuss a few of those problems, look at what Congress is doing right now, and discuss what the next conservative administration should be doing. So I'll actually begin by asking if you guys have any fan favorites of corruption at the DOJ or FBI. Congressman?
I think I'm Dan Bishop from North Carolina, and I sit on the Judiciary Committee and on the Select Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government, Select Subcommittee. And I think it's hard to compare which one's biggest. Molly, you've named some great hits, but for me, the biggest, most massive scope issue of all is what I refer to as the censorship laundering enterprise in the federal government, in which across the federal enterprise, not just FBI and not just frankly, the CIA, the Global Engagement Center at the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, on and on and on, all have engaged directly with social media platforms and other media, and have engaged, this is a part I think that we're only lately understanding the fuller the scope of, with a host of quasi-academic NGOs attached in many cases to leftist universities, and they've worked together to sort of outsource the censorship regime, but they are just not only taking down individual posts that, so the FBI continuously in touch with all the social media platforms and run up to the 2020 election, but on a continuing basis, regularly taking down social media posts, but through these organizations, they're also taking down entire narratives. They are controlling the American public dialogue. It is, as Jonathan Turley said, the biggest censorship scheme in the history of the United States. And I think, and that's just one, we can go into a lot of other ones, but that's the biggest candidate for deep excavation by the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Federal Government.
Amen. If I might just add to this, what they're doing with this censorship industrial complex is wanton election interference. What they are able to do by having this broad network of government agencies and outside government groups, they suppress every single story. You wonder, why is the world going so crazy? It's because of this. They elevate left-wing media, they elevate their advertising platforms, they suppress non-left-wing media, and so that's how you see this rapid social change on every single issue, whether we're talking about abortion or trans issues or the problems with rule of law. They are preventing the American people from having a say in this. Okay, Gene, do you have one?
Well, look, it's hard to follow that because I'm in complete and total agreement. The notion that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is supposed to be the premier law enforcement agency in the country, has the time and the wherewithal and the bandwidth to be flagging social media posts of American citizens as misinformation or disinformation or malinformation and collaborating to control speech in this country is unfathomable. As misinformation. Think about 20 years ago, who could have ever predicted that a bunch of college kids who were goofing off on Facebook, having fun with the platform, sharing their news of their latest things, 20 years later, the FBI, of course the platform grew, a lot of other folks besides college kids got on the platform, but again, the FBI engaging in controlling and flagging things for social media companies to censor for themselves. That should be shocking to every single American, regardless of your political perspective. There is a big difference between the government getting information out there and providing information. And certainly in my last role in the Trump administration, we had our fair share of what you could call fake news brought out by different media figures and different media outlets. And it was always a struggle to try to get them, hey, this is the truth, this is the story, this is what happened. And so there's a legitimate role for government to play to put that information out there and let people make their own decision about what happened. But it's a completely different thing for the law enforcement apparatus of this country, under the auspices of the Department of Justice, to be controlling what you hear as an American citizen, what you see, that is shocking. It should be 5-alarm fire for everybody in terms of what needs to be done. If you weren't shocked and outraged by that, then you haven't read enough about it.
Russ?
Yeah, so I gravitate a little bit more towards the system. So my examples would be the extent to which, we watch the news and why do we see all the SWAT teams showing up for what are rather, even if true, and I don't think half these are true, why do you need a SWAT team? And then you realize, because we've hired some of these whistleblowers, that it's embedded in their metrics, that their managers get bonuses based on the extent of their use of SWAT. Other incentives systemically that FBI is now an intel agency. In the aftermath of 9/11, they went from being a law enforcement, and now they are a law enforcement, and I would put air quotes around that, to an intel agency in which intel drives the people on the ground. So when you talk to the rank and file FBI agents, the best of them, and I do think there's a culture-wide problem. It's not just a bunch of bad apples. You'll find that they tell stories about how DC will have the metrics, the intel analyst will have to have a certain number of intel reports that they submit based on their theories of what they're seeing or misconstruing, and they'll call the agents and say, I need you to go and ask the following questions. And this person, it's not a live investigation. They're asking themselves, well, why would we do that? And so you, over and over, you see systemic-wide corruption. So that's why I'm so excited about the project that we've been asked to do with Heritage, is because we have to dismantle systems. We have to be able to unpack how and why we have a cultural-wide problem at the Department of Justice, FBI in particular, and to be able to dismantle that, and to be able to do it with the moral high ground as conservatives who love law and order and law enforcement, that we are not doing it to the law enforcement that we love, we are doing it to what has built up in the aftermath of the last several decades and reached a peak under James Comey. And when we were in the administration, I was there, I was in the transition, day one, last day of the administration. You know, all of this was developing while we were in it. And unless you were, you know, Molly was on the outside and Fox News was raising the concerns and Devin Nunes was doing his work on the committee, but we didn't know they were doing a coup d'etat from the Department of Justice. And when you realize that, and then you realize how they use systems and technical words like disinformation, Congressman Bishop sent me the other day, he said, how did we let this thing get into a bill during the Trump administration? And the answer is, we didn't know that that's what they were using as the technical term to be able to execute all the bad things that they were trying to do, because the careers, the deep state, the administrative state, they get the joke. They have the code. And we need to give the code to the next administration in that way, and that's what I'm really excited about, Gene's chapter on DOJ and being able to implement it throughout the entirety of the book.
So let's first talk about what can be done at this executive branch level. We saw what happened. You know, I think we all have this basic understanding. One of the reasons why the Reagan Revolution was so effective was because Reagan came in with an army of people and with outside support of ideas. Trump was very disruptive. He was is opposed by the Washington, D.C. establishment and didn't have that same level of support. The idea here is that next time anyone who's not a leftist gets elected president, you want to have things ready to go, systems to unwind. Let's talk about what would be some of the most effective ways to fight back against what has been done to our Department of Justice.
I guess I'll begin, Molly, and I'll take go from what Russ said a moment ago, that I raised a question with him, and what he's referring to is, if you go and look at the roots of the problem that I was talking about, the so-called this response to foreign malign influence is what Russia is creating narratives and bot networks in the United States, according to certain outside NGOs like Hamilton 68, or perpetuating them on social media, and therefore you do all this. That's the root of this censorship regime. It is true that if you go and look at the National Defense Authorization Acts for the last 4 or 5 years, in each one there's an additional kernel of something that these agencies have used as the rationale or as the root of building this immense network that now, or this immense enterprise that now exists to control American speech. Understand, and this may be a difficult point for some to hear, that is not something that one party alone has caused. That is a bipartisan caused problem. So the next administration is first going to have to, as it gets staffed, someone's going to have to do some clear thinking about who will address the problem. We cannot make that problem worse. There is currently a bill that's been introduced in the Senate. It has bipartisan support, called the Restrict Act. It would be the next chapter in the restriction of Americans' First Amendment freedoms if it advances. It is not a question of Republican versus Democrat. It is a question of whether we're going to continue to be in this country civil libertarians, whether we continue to regard the First Amendment as the root of liberty. And I think Barry Goldwater said extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. And I don't know if you use the term extremism, nobody hears the rest of the sentence, but I think we've got to re-embrace that core idea, and no one can depart from it. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, we've got to resist it on both sides. So I think we've got to start with, to the point the problem that I've made mention of, we've got to start with a clear-eyed view. It has to start with the president-elect. and then his personnel operation is going to have to make sure he plugs in the right people. And then, as Russ suggests, they are going to have to be fearless. And late in the Trump administration on Air Force One, a cabinet secretary described to me why it was so important to move into a second administration. That the Obama hangovers had been hanging on at the mid-level for all of that time, and to shake them, it's sort of like you have a certain number of political appointees, massive number of bureaucrats. You're almost litigating constantly within the cabinet, within that cabinet agency, to disrupt their control. They want to perpetuate that control regardless of what the American people think. They believe that Washington continuity is what should happen, and the role of the American people is to decide whether you want to steer the ship of state 5 degrees that direction or 5 degrees this. In some respects, we need to go 180 degrees, and the American people are entitled to make those decisions and to have them stick.
If I might just add one point on that. This is a problem at every single agency, but I think we would agree that it's a particular problem at Department of Justice, which has created this idea that it's sort of extra constitutional, that it's not beholden to the political process. So one of the reforms that was suggested in this mandate for leadership is revisiting the 10-year FBI term, which was actually done with an intent to keep things from being too politicized, but has allowed for the bureaucracy to exert control against the American people. Any other ideas worth highlighting?
Well, and let me just elaborate upon that recommendation as one little bit of tidbit more information. Sure, the president has the authority to fire the FBI director anytime that he wants, but that comes at a political cost. That takes political capital. And everyone remembers the outcries after James Comey was fired in the last administration. That is a political cost, and that takes away from your ability to focus in on other things. There is no reason why the director of the FBI should be a 10-year appointment serving across administrations. The notion that there's some kind of apolitical law enforcement objective that's going to be achieved by doing that and not ensuring actual political accountability it's a notion of the past. I mean, the department is so riddled with problems right now. It's personnel, as everyone's discussed, which is huge. It's policy, it's programs, it's bureaucracy. There is top to bottom reform that has to be done. And I would encourage you, I'm not biased in any way, but you might want to read the book. Buy the book, read the chapter. The 30-something pages of recommendations that just barely scratch the surface. But I would say this: if you are a conservative who thinks that a 5-degree change this way or a 5-degree change that way at the Department of Justice is going to ensure that this country continues, that this constitutional republic continues and thrives for decades into the future for our kids and our grandkids, you are missing, you're not reading the room right. Look, things are not good. The situation is bad. I can tell you, I served at DHS, I served in the Secretary's office, I served every Attorney General that served Donald Trump. I got to work with almost every component of the Department of Justice, except for the Antitrust Division and Tax, I think, which, they have their own issues. I have seen firsthand the way that these things work. I have seen the way that the bureaucracy manipulates things. I have seen the refusal of career employees to take lawful actions to defend the president's lawful policy objectives and programs, to refuse to sign their names to cases because they disagree with it as a policy matter. I mean, that is such a farce. And that is such a violation of some of the basic legal ethics that every lawyer learns in law school. It used to be the case in this country, it's not so much anymore, but it used to be the case that people understood if you are a lawyer, your job is to zealously advocate for your client. Your job is to take their position and advance it as hard as you can. And at the end of the day, you can walk out of the room, you can shake the other side's hand, and you can go about your business. Of course, things have changed in the legal community, but it's a problem in the Department of Justice when you have people, careers, within the civil division or within U.S. attorneys' offices who say, oh, I can't sign that. I disagree with that position that the president's advancing. That's nonsense. If it's lawful, the president is the chief executive officer of our government. Your job is to defend it. Your job is to do what he tells you to do if it is a lawful and constitutional objective. If you have a policy opposition to it, that's your problem. Quit. Go work somewhere else. It's not your call. That's not why you're there. And so there is a whole rift, a whole host of things that need to be done at the department, a lot of which involve personnel, a lot of which even involve things as kind of boring as reporting structures, physical placement and location of offices that can be done to restore the integrity of this proud institution. It has to exist. We need a Department of Justice. We need an FBI, but we need one that functions to advance the interests of the American people. We don't need an FBI and a Department of Justice that functions to enhance its own glory, to perpetuate the careers of the career people who are working there. That's nonsense. It is there to protect the American people from violent crime, to defend the rule of law, and to make this country a better place. And it has not been doing that, especially over the last two plus years.
So I think all departments and agencies, particularly kind of the ones you know off the top of your head, are important. But the Department of Justice is more important because it confines the president's ability to establish what he can do under the law. And if a president can't ask questions, you all have lawyers. If you can't ask your lawyer, hey, can I do X, Y, and Z? Your lawyer doesn't say, oh, you're trying to violate the law. Your lawyer's trying to inform the grounds for the conversation. And yet President Trump had a bunch of people around him who was constantly like sitting on eggs and saying, oh my gosh, he's getting me to violate the law. And you need a Department of Justice that understands the moment we are in, and this is going to unsettle you. So let me talk through it before you get unsettled, before you get there. We're living in a post-constitutional situation right now. That's the reality of our moment. We are people who love the Constitution. We're the people who want to get back to the Constitution. We're the people that are a little unsettled saying that because we don't want to give credence to what the left has accomplished. But to the extent that we are not acknowledging that truth, we are confining our own people and our own warriors' freedom of action to get us back to that place. And so let me give you an example. How has the left done it? We're like in a marriage in which one party divorced the other 50 decades ago, or 5 decades ago, and didn't tell anyone, and just kind of abided by some of the norms of the Constitution, but largely walked away from it, and the other party is still sitting there thinking that they're in a marriage. And so let me give you an example. How they do this, obviously progressivism is a part of it, but the notion of independent agencies. There are no independent agencies, but independent agencies is one of those things that has allowed them over time to establish what is really an administrative state that's not just Article 1 or Article 2, it's a merging of both. So that DOJ bureaucrats are looking towards leadership from the echelons of Capitol Hill, not the rank and file, and the president, Article 2, does not have control over his own bureaucracy. Okay, so independent agencies is one of those things. You can't, in government, come out and challenge to the same degree you can out of government. There are no independent agencies. Department of Justice is not an independent agency. If anyone brings it up in a policy meeting in the White House, I want them out of the meeting. That is something that you have to do on the outside. And yet, you could have the best personnel, you could even have some of the best policies, but at the paradigm level, if you haven't adopted what I would call radical constitutionalism to get out of the precedents of the last 100 years and get back to what would Thomas Jefferson or James Madison do in this meeting, how would he approach the issue, not just from what the Constitution says, but how it was devised to be able to have separation of powers and confrontation between the branches? If we can't have that conversation, we are not saving the country. And Department of Justice is the lead dog in that conversation as it pertains to what a new administration can do. It's why the Attorney General is such a vital pick. It's why the Office of Legal Counsel is such an important job. Everything we want to do has to go through the Office of Legal Counsel. And so DOJ has to be fixed, and I believe it has to be done at the paradigm shifting level.
Is that all?
No.
Well, one of the interesting things about this chapter isn't just about getting the Department of Justice and the FBI to stop doing the things that they shouldn't be doing, but also to get the Department of Justice back to doing what it actually should be doing. So if the Department of Justice is about preserving the rule of law and about fighting crime, this is one of the ideas that I kind of saw in the chapter was like just providing more direction. You know, under the current administration, we have a completely open border. We're not defending the rule of law on the border at all. We're not doing anything about fentanyl or human smuggling across the border. We also have this situation where we are prosecuting any and all conservative thought and action or threatening to do the same for the purpose of chilling that, while allowing even hard left, radical, violent leftist thought and action or policies that support those to run free. So what isn't being done now that does need to be done to reform things?
So I'm going to start again. Okay, I think there are a couple of answers. One is that, and there was a great article and there's a book out there, I can't remember the name of the former FBI agent who wrote it, that is on, that posits that when the FBI became an intelligence agency, it also was Robert Mueller's first move to centralize decision-making in the FBI from the historic case of there being field offices with independent action and decision-making that is broadly decentralized. I think that's a root of the problem. And then through the Obama administration, to Russ's point, while the institution of the Department of Justice, and frankly this applies to many others, has a patina, a surface appearance of institutional and anodyne and politically agnostic, that is anything but the truth. It's a perfect cosmetic cover for deep state, political agenda advocate. So I think one of the first things that needs to occur is where that has been perfected in the central decision-making in the Washington field office and in headquarters needs to be de-emphasized. The FBI's authority and decision-making should be decentralized back to field offices around the country, and if there's a supervisory activity to occur in the Department of Justice, it ought to be primarily in the United States Attorney's offices and judicial districts across the country. The headquarters decision-making should be attenuated. And the other thing I would say is this: on the weaponization subcommittee is intended to be modeled after what you guys may have heard of the Church Committee in the 1970s, operated or headed by Frank Church in the Senate from Idaho, big liberal. But it was digging into problems that had been recognized both in the intelligence community more generally and also in the FBI. And out of that effort and a subsequent effort in the Senate to look into how the FBI was doing undercover operations, we've seen lots of reform attempts. The existence of IG, Inspector General's offices, are designed to be a reform to prevent abuses. The Attorney General's guidelines, the so-called DIOG, I can't even know what that acronym stands for, but it's the manual by which the FBI operates. All these things, time after time, we've taken reform steps to respond to problems. We've got specific Attorney General guidelines on the conduct of undercover operations, and yet the Whitmer Fednapping plot happens. We have guidelines on the use of confidential human sources, but IG reports time and again say they're being roundly abused, and they just go on. That's what I hear from the American people all the time when they're somewhat skeptical about what we can do in Congress. They say, well, what are you going to do about it? I want to see some people held accountable. And frankly, we're going to need a presidency to see that that happens ultimately. But I am inclined to believe, as I look across the federal enterprise, it's just too damn big. It's too well funded. I think that we actually need to go to the appropriations process, and this is frankly a doctrine that Russ Vought, as much as anybody, has been the author of. We need to defund woke and weaponized government. We must cut their budget. And there's nothing inconsistent about that for conservatives either. That institution can operate quite robustly and well on a smaller budget, and we won't be talking about building a new headquarters for the FBI that is going to be bigger than the Pentagon. That seems to me lunatic. And yet, seed funding for design of that was provided in the $1.7 trillion omnibus that came out of the Senate, and another $500 million increase in their operating budget. The message has not been received. But those are the two keys from my perspective.
Well, once again, Congressman Bishop's exactly right. And the notion that we're going to build, there's this war, I guess, between Virginia and Maryland right now. Which one's going to land the FBI headquarters? This big, bad building that's going to be great, and we're going to have all these jobs. You don't need a gigantic FBI headquarters. You need gigantic, to the extent you need gigantic anything, you need law enforcement operations in the field. So you need to enhance your field offices. You need to equip your law enforcement officers who are going to be doing the right things. You don't need a huge headquarters. And quite frankly, the FBI director's office, go back to history, in the RFK building, which is the Main Justice headquarters, the FBI director's office used to be in that building. It used to be on the 5th floor. It's now currently occupied by the Civil Rights Office in the Department of Justice. But the director of the FBI ought to probably have his office within the Department of Justice. His senior leadership needs to be within the Department of Justice as a physical daily reminder. You work for the Attorney General. You are not independent. You are not this independent actor that is on par with the department. That is not the way that this system is supposed to work. Now look, at the department, there's all kinds of things that need to be done. You have to get priorities placed on the unique federal interests that the federal government has. So things like combating transnational violent crime, things like our immigration system, our open borders. The department, a lot of people don't realize this, the Department of Justice is responsible for administering our immigration court system. There are millions of cases pending in that system that are going nowhere because of the policies of this administration. All that does, when you don't have an effective administration of the immigration court system, is that it provides a de facto amnesty for people to be here for years and years and years and years and build ties and have families and other things in this country when they had no case to start with. They had no case to start with. They had no asylum claim. They should have been gone years ago. And so we have this administration that today is not focused on the things that the Department of Justice actually needs to do. And this is bigger than just a complaint, because if you as a department are not focused on those kind of unique federal interests, it gives you time and bandwidth to do things that you have no business doing. Right? So if you are if you're an agent in the field or at some office, or you're a prosecutor, you're in the Main Justice, or you're in the Assistant U.S. Attorney's Office, and you're looking at your day-to-day jobs and your tasks, if you are so busy trying to take down gangs and drug cartels and human smuggling rings and trying to restore safety to the citizens to the streets for citizens across this country, you're not going to have time to be focused on things like watching people's Facebook accounts and flagging stuff that you disagree with. You have to place priorities on the things that the department should be doing and not give time to work on the things that the department should not be doing. And that sounds pretty basic, but in practice, it requires a lot more. It comes back to the personnel, it comes back to the policies. But again, if you get distracted, if you have an unwieldy department and an unwieldy bureau that thinks of itself as an intelligence agency now since 9/11, then you allow for these things to happen. You have to restore it to its original intent. You have to get the American people's interests first and foremost, protecting public safety, defending the rule of law. And if you realign all of your activities around those two things, I think good things will happen.
Thanks. With just a few minutes left to go before we can take a few questions, Russ, maybe you can take us through what needs to happen from this church committee, the weaponization subcommittee, and what we might expect.
Have really high hopes for this committee. I think it's stocked with the best members on the Republican side of the aisle. I think it's really important. We all know we have a thesis of the case. We know that that thesis is correct. We don't know the extent of that thesis and all the processes that were used by the FBI, by the DOJ, and other agencies. This is not just those two that we talk about. This is Brennan used the CIA and the intel agencies to overnight do an intel assessment. I'm interested in how did he pick those people to get to hit the magic 8-ball and give him what he wanted back to be able to leak to the press. So there are nodes within all of these alphabet soup agencies of corruption, hardcore corruption, in which every member on that team is an operative. So it's really important, in my view, that the Weaponization Committee establishes the entirety of the case on those nodes, and then begins to paint the picture on the systems that are being used to be able to help us or help any administration on day one to be able to use every non-statutory change executively to immediately seize control, and to have laid the foundation on any statutorily changes, whether that's the tenure of the FBI head, to be able to have that debate. And this is, it's politics, it's policy, it's process, right? So this debate is happening in the context of a presidential race that I hope gets run on the basis of a return to self-government in this country. So that the American people that, Molly and I look at the polls, they're probably 50-50 on the notion of the Russia hoax existing. Maybe we have them on our side. We need them to be 70-30, that there is a massive problem at DOJ and FBI. Polls are dynamic. We need to have that conversation so that a president wins and we can save the country one agency at a time.
Well, one thing that might help with some of these issues of the politicization of these agencies just came out just this week from this whistleblower from the Treasury Department, who is apparently special agent, like in charge of an investigation into some aspect of Biden family business corruption. And we don't really know a ton about it yet, but what it seems to be is an allegation that legitimate criminal indictments and investigations have been shut down at the highest levels. This is the kind of thing, this is the kind of thing that in a normal world would be the most explosive thing that has happened in years, and it would be the topic of, top of every news show. Because we have a completely corrupt propaganda press, we have to fight against that as well in order to get this news information out. But it's the kind of thing that really demonstrates what we're talking about, that there is no rule of law at the Department of Justice, that if you're an ally of the left, you will be able to get away with pretty much anything, and if you're an opponent of the left, then you will be prosecuted beyond belief for even the smallest misdemeanor. So I wonder if things like this, Congressman, might help with the effort to show the problems that need to be fixed.
Molly, I think if you go back to the model of the church committee that I made reference to earlier, and you look at that history and you read carefully what occurred, there were a combination of things. There were the ideas that they were going to look into, and there were events that occurred from outside that galvanized the process. The one that you've just made reference to, that a senior supervisory agent in the IRS or in Treasury has decided to undertake to use the whistleblower process, going through a lawyer, maintaining anonymity, making contact with the appropriate committees in Congress, the Ways and Means Committee and the Judiciary Committee, on which, as I said, I serve. And what that now reporting is going on through leaks that it may be about, or what the subject matter, all we know is that the person thinks some sensitive matter, at least by this lawyer's testimony.
The Story of Man, the blog. April 22, 2023, 12:45 HR at DNKUA. to Senator Jack Reed. Please accept this very long, live, unscripted and unedited letter as my best attempt to speak my mind today, as I require as per law your immediate attention to assist me and the Americans that work for me. As required to complete the delivery of the ITU ETAR SIGINT Audit Findings Report to the Senate Armed Services Committee as per positive law and rights retained, I have signed your release. I will be forwarding to this email address information required of your and yours. Factually, you need to know what you do not: the wire, sir, the radio, the electric grid of the House of Man. IT is a living thing, sir. A perversion of nature, created by man to oppress man, and that is what it will be and what it will remain to be until such time as leadership finds the vision of reality. There were no synergistic studies done prior to the deployment of the radio networks. Factually, a single unlawfully tapped wire before any of us were even born has been, is, and remains the only valid reason for. We all speak of leadership, we speak of right and wrong. Nothing of the wire that you hear, sir, is valid, nor could it ever be until we take it all back to the basics. Factually, sir, there is not debt of the U.S. flag, nor has there ever been, and yet it exists due to a perversion of the spectrum, sir. There must be a mil-spec radio, a government radio, a corporate radio, and a family radio, sir. The legacy systems of the Cold War must be dismantled, sir. The removal of towers and cables, sir, that must happen. If they do not, then the only thing the Americans will be remembered for in the timeline of history is that we have the ability to end usury, debt, poverty, and war, and did not in favor of allowing for profit of fake money earned by killing children and military veterans. The United States of America has never known one day of peace, sir, not in our entire history. The House of Man, sir, has never known peace, sir. It will take simple things to allow the House of Man to know peace. It's called duty, sir. It's called honor, sir. It's called fidelity, sir. It's called bravery, sir. It's called integrity, sir. It's called there are no versions of truth, sir. A man killing a man to save a man is a fool's errand, and no soldier I have ever met in my 40 years of standing this line alone, unsupported, abused, mistreated, marginalized. This is not how a nation that says they care about veterans should treat a human, sir. There are 44 Purple Hearts on my wall, sir, and 40,000 of my clan that have given all to the nation of my birth. I am not required to be subjected to fraud to be a man, sir, and yet that is what the broken wire has done to me and you and every other human being. And we, sir, people of our time that breathing today, we have the ability and the knowledge to end the usury, debt, poverty, and war, sir. A simple act of law, sir, already on the books, based upon the fact it is unlawful and immoral for any man, woman, or child of any race, color, or creed to live in fear of its own government, military, or corporate officers, and if humans that are agents to the juridical state of the House of Man are found to have lied on the wire for profit, then the law says they must be removed from the wire and sent to the unemployment line and be barred from public service, sir. This is the only valid discussion any senator or congressperson should be having. The idea of classification of public data is the crime, sir. And it came to be via the usurpation of rights of the United States Army in 1903, sir. There is no such thing as a statutory general, sir. Stolen valor, the stolen wealth of the American man by lesser breeds of men that betrayed their own kind, is fact based upon fear, sir. A father and mother that lives in fear for the lives of their children, sir, that is the best example of a benchmark for what not to do. Perversions of meanings of words hold no legitimate authority over a man's right, sir. I ask that you please do not make this a political scandal or a partisan issue. I ask you to set aside any agenda you have based solely upon the idea of being the independent is not a crime, sir. It is by law required of and forensic audit. Therefore, see truth. It has taken me 40 years to speak to you. Therefore, please honor my simple request for delivery of my passport. and cause the end of the unlawful use of the radio by so-called banks to create unlawful blacklist against Americans. It is damned wrong, sir, that any man or woman should be afraid to collect their paycheck. I require nothing other in return of what has been unlawfully as follow me for the children to be best served. You and the other members of the Senate and Congress enabled me to do this job, and when the findings did not meet with political agendas, my family and my business was intentionally thrown under the bus at the expense of my rights and the rights of my children, and of these factual things I do forgive you all, sir. Attrition under color of law and the unlawful use of wire has been as remains the single greatest threat to the way of life of man, woman, and child. It is time for the elected and appointed to kindly get the hell out of the way and let the people that have been trained to end the crime on the wire do their job, sir.
Testimony or his lawyer's statement, some sensitive matter has been the subject of political interference in order to see ordinary investigative processes not continue and conclude in the appropriate way. I'm going to be hearing about that soon, and I'm going to have an opportunity to ask. And what people need to understand is, while the Weaponization Subcommittee has had a number of hearings, a number of very, very consequential on a variety of topics already, and we intend to continue doing things in public, we are also working in private. I'm in transcribed interviews with really fantastic staff every week, exploring a variety of topics, some of which I can't talk about yet. But I do think that has the potential to be of extraordinary significance. And I was one of the 20 back in January who believed we needed to pause in our process of electing a speaker in order to negotiate critical, specific points. Thank you. Some people might want to throw tomatoes, I don't know, but there were some, you heard a lot about the procedural rules that we wanted to accomplish, and we did. But there were substantive points. You're getting ready to see some manifestation of the substantive points in the package that we have rolled out and that I believe 218 Republicans will vote for on a debt ceiling package next week. But we also, this was another very substantive point, was the creation of this select subcommittee and the empowering of this subcommittee to take on a task that is of immense proportions. And that is why we made it available to it. And frankly, Russ was an original thinker on this and helped me through that particular negotiation to vest it with authority to reach across the federal government, to not be stopped by any barrier about intelligence information or the like, and to have the resources equal to or in excess of the January 6th faux committee that the Democrats ran in order to try to intimidate Americans and to delegitimize half of the population. And I say all of the work that we are doing is only the start. The subpoenas need to fly, and we need to investigate everything we possibly can. Now, some good conservatives will say, that doesn't sound right to me. I don't want you guys to spend your time just harassing people. Let me emphasize this to you, and you take it from me, I hope you will. This is not about harassment. We've illustrated in the comments that we've made that there are threats to fundamental liberty in this country that come from the federal government bureaucracy that you cannot imagine. And we have one chance to solve them. That means getting to it in this Congress while we have the House of Representatives, and then seeing to it that the American people understand this perspective so that we can follow through as a country and elect a president who will restore liberty in the country, restore the Constitution to its proper place.
Great. Well, we have time for a few questions. I don't actually know the process, but you all seem to know the process, so I will let. Where do we have microphones coming? Just go to whoever you feel like, young lady.
Hi, Carl Gollivan, retired special agent, U.S. Customs. I was among many who sifted the rubble after 9/11 in New York. Congressman Bishop, question for you. World Trade Center number 7. Have you ever heard of it? Same question for everyone here. It's the third tower that was brought down by explosive demolition that day. And I include towers 1 and 2. NYPD and firefighters will testify there were many explosions not attributable to jet fuel. 9/11 was a false flag event. intended to drive us into Middle Eastern wars, primarily for the benefit of Israel. And they would still like to see us destroy Iran. And the same can be said about November 22nd, 1963.
I don't really hear a question here. Let's move on
I
to
hear
another
that we
person.
need to.
Could we move on to another question?
Thank you.
Amala, you referred to the corrupt media, and does your program have a strategy for getting this message out to the American public with this corrupt media that's going to block everything? There's got to be another strategy there
I
as well.
am curious about that too. I think it's such an important issue. Like, people need to think through what happens on the left. On the left, they can run a completely fraudulent committee. I mean, they ran a uniparty committee, the J6 committee, appointed completely by Nancy Pelosi. It had no Republican-appointed members. It was treated as legitimate by the corrupt propaganda press. They rolled things out with their friends at the New York Times and the Washington Post, who do lie all the time about very important issues, and frequently for the purpose of getting into war and other problems. But the right, when they're doing things, they have to work with a very limited media space. I'm very happy at the Federalist that we are part of that, that will actually report real news and information. What we did just to fight the Russia collusion hoax alone is so amazing. Like, there were 10 of us probably, like 10 reporters total, who thought that maybe Donald Trump wasn't a traitor who had colluded with Russia. We fought back with very limited resources to get even to the point where you say, Russ, half the country doesn't believe it. But it is an overwhelming battle. So what are you guys going to do to get this message out, given how corrupt our media are?
So I get this question a lot, and I think it's really helpful for us to understand what we can fix and what we can't fix. We can't fix where the mainstream media is. We, in some respects, are insurgents. Okay? And so Newt Gingrich had a very, very, I think, profound quote one time where he said, the media loves confrontation. If you give them confrontation, you will get their attention. When you get their attention, you can educate. Are they going to present your facts the right way? No, but they're going to give an interview to Dan Bishop, and Dan Bishop is going to be able to get through to even their voters. So a lot of times, even on, on kind of the Fox News space, they look, oh my gosh, there's all sorts of confrontation with the speakers fight. That's intentional, because that is the only way that you can have a national debate to be able to save the country, to get people off of Netflix and from watching their favorite sports channel, to be able to pay attention to the stakes of what we are facing right now. So when people talk about a shutdown or a debt limit, yeah, it's
part of that.
After 9/11.
Can. Now, some good conservatives will say, that doesn't sound right to me. I don't want you guys to spend your time just harassing people. Let me emphasize this to you, and you take it from me, I hope you will. This is not about harassment. We've illustrated in the comments that we've made that there are threats to fundamental liberty in this country that come from the federal government bureaucracy that you cannot imagine. And we have one chance to solve them. That means getting to it in this Congress while we have the House of Representatives, and then seeing to it that the American people understand this perspective so that we can follow through as a country and elect a president who will restore liberty in the country, restore the Constitution to its proper place.
Great. Well, we have time for a few questions. I don't actually know the process, but you all seem to know the process. So I will let, where do we have microphones coming? Just go to whoever you feel like, young lady.
Hi, Carl Gollivan, retired special agent, U.S. Customs. I was among many who sifted the rubble after 9/11 in New York. Congressman Bishop, question for you. World Trade Center number 7. Have you ever heard of it? Same question for everyone here. It's the third tower that was brought down by explosive demolition that day. And I include towers 1 and 2. NYPD and firefighters will testify there were many explosions not attributable to jet fuel. 9/11 was a false flag event intended to drive us into Middle Eastern wars, primarily for the benefit of Israel. And they would still like to see us destroy Iran. And the same can be said about November 22nd, 1963.
I don't really hear a question here. Let's move on
I
to
hear
another.
that we need to
Could we move on to another question?